to a lot of people, this is science fiction. And, the idea that you could cough into your phone and get a COVID, no COVID result that is not worse than, the current standard, which is a molecular diagnostic, a PCR test. There's some people, when we talk to them about it, they're like, no, that's just not true. They're like, that's just not possible. And I understand because it does kind of seem like science fiction.
Welcome to Future Perfect Tech, a webinar and podcast series by Harbor Research. Each month, we'll be having discussions with the leading experts in smart systems and the Internet of Things on innovations in markets, technologies, and ecosystems that are working together to build a better future.
I do believe in the strange way I'm soul, because I'm sure we're going to have the model.
Today, we're here with Kitty Kolding, CEO and founder of RAIsonance, a group of AI-powered biometric safety and health companies focused on impacting respiratory illness. Kitty has founded 3 companies and has served as CEO of multiple early-stage and mid-stage startups, marketing tech and services, data, and AI. And today, we're talking to Kitty about an incredible innovation she is pioneering in AI-driven analysis of sounds, particularly the sound of coughs, using that analysis to indicate whether a person has COVID. Kitty, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Owen. Thanks for having me.
So, Kitty, the idea that we could diagnose COVID based on a cough sounds absolutely remarkable and a whole lot more accessible than those little nose swabs that we have to be that have to be sent into a lab that my kids are all having to use and are really annoyed with. Before we delve into the technology, though, let's start at the beginning. How did you discover this innovation?
About a year ago, we had this sort of thesis that AI could do this job. Classifiers are a thing in artificial intelligence, and this kind of sound recognition and classification is known. It's not quite science fiction, and so. The initial thesis was that we could point this at COVID. And at the time, the National Science Foundation had just put out an urgent call. They wanted to fund technology that could address COVID in some way. Let's do this. Let's try to put a proposal together and get it into NSF.
Okay, so that was the spark. My mind is kind of spinning with the potential of this. If we could get a little bit more technical for a moment, you've talked before about a cough signature. What exactly is a cough signature? Yeah, and I'm gonna be even more precise with you in answering that question, because when we say cough, it's a familiar way to refer to what we're talking to, but what we're actually measuring is a forced vocalization. So it's not a spontaneous cough, like if you had a cold or you had some other respiratory thing that was making you cough. That's a spontaneous natural cough. And physiologically, that's actually quite different than what we're doing. We're asking people to go to force themselves to cough. And as a result, it works just a little bit differently in terms of the way your body processes that to create that sound. It stimulates a series of nerves. And so the human body, the way you should think about it is the human body is a resonance chamber from your diaphragm up to the back of your sinuses. You're one big sound resonance chamber, thus the name. And what we're doing is measuring what's going on in that resonance chamber. That's really what the technology is doing. And with AI, you can do it with incredible precision, and you can look for patterns. So you can say, this is the sound I'm listening to. What other sounds is that like or unlike? And so that's the way that we approached this problem. When we take in a cough sample, a sound, and almost all the time the samples that we use and that we intend to use with our products are from something as simple as a mobile phone, your cell phone or a tablet. You can even use the product on a notebook or a desktop computer. But it takes in that sound, does a bunch of pre-processing, runs it through
our customized cough detector. So the first thing it does is say, is that really a cough, or is that someone honking a horn or dropping a plate on the floor or someone singing a song? So the first thing it does is say, is that a cough? After that, it goes through this ensemble of classifiers. And in the case of this idea of diagnosis of COVID, it points at a library that we've created that I'll tell you a little bit more about, that is cough sounds from people that have been definitively diagnosed. And it's learning that pattern of what does a COVID cough sound like. And in our research, and many others are doing this research, I should say, there's some brilliant scientists and folks doing this research. We're certainly not the only ones. But there is a very unique signature to every single kind of cough. And so that's part of our work, is to build a library of those sounds that our AI can accurately predict and say, what does that sound represent?
And if I understand it correctly, these cough signatures in our parlance, are they really unique?
Yeah, they actually are. One of our other products, a product called SoundPass, is actually a biometric safety product. It uses some of the same technology, but it functions just like you would think of facial recognition or a retina scan or a fingerprint, in as much as you can identify an individual with enough precision, and artificial intelligence and machine learning allows for that degree of precision. So yes, the short answer is yes.
I mean, this sounds like it could turn up in a James Bond movie. Seriously, I remember when, right, they that one came out and they were using retinas to identify people, and everyone was like, "Is that really possible?"
Right.
Now I think we're going to go through the same thing with your technology. This is fantastic. Yeah. So, if you could just describe for us, though, how does your model that you're developing differentiate COVID as opposed to detecting what might be a flu or other related respiratory diseases? Yeah.
So I mentioned this idea of the cough library a minute ago. And so as a company, maybe I should zoom out for a minute. As a company, we're looking at a few different ways to bring our capabilities into the market. One is this product that, its purpose is to diagnose COVID using software only, and indeed via your mobile phone. That is its purpose. And I'll tell you about kind of our journey there and how we intend to bring that product to market. Another is this biometric safety thing that we talked about called SoundPass. And there's a third new product that we're just in the process of working through that's going to support long haul COVID sufferers, because that has become an enormous health issue globally. So to the extent we have time, we can talk a little bit more about that. But in the case of identifying COVID, what we do is we've built effectively a calibration quality sound library of these COVID cough samples. And what we discovered as we started to work through this technology initially is that every kind of cough has a very different signature that with AI can be detected. So over time, while our initial offering is going to be focused on our first goal is to try to support and impact COVID, of course. Over time, our objective is to deploy a series of libraries. So a tuberculosis library and a COPD library, and one for asthma and bronchitis and congestive heart failure. All of these conditions where this forced vocalization will have a unique set of signatures such that we can train the AI to distinguish. And we also know that some people will present with two signatures. They may have COVID and COPD, or, asthma and the flu. So we also make room for that distinction, and the technology so far has, in our benchtop testing, has proven capable of that distinction. That's the way that we are, thinking about addressing far more than just COVID. But COVID is a big problem. We're very happy to start there. If you had a condition like asthma, you're going to create a baseline that includes your condition, right? It's baked into your baseline. You can't extract that. It would pick up if you had an acute asthma attack, right? If all of a sudden you had a really tough day and you had an attack, you would notice that it would not authenticate for maybe a day or some number of hours. You definitely would see that. That is its job, is to pick up on things like that. So it works perfectly well, but it's going to notice those things, and you'll know that it's because you have asthma and you are recovering from an acute asthma attack. But it definitely is designed to work around those kinds of issues.
And let's, sticking with this for a moment, because it's absolutely fascinating. Let's say that the patient is asymptomatic, so they're not showing any other signs. You get them to do a forced vocalization, so in other words, a cough, into a standard, microphone on a smartphone. Is your model able to identify whether that patient might be presenting with COVID?
Yes. What we and others have, results that MIT has done some incredible work in this category. The behavior that COVID creates in the human body is consistent whether you are experiencing those symptoms or not. And so all of the technology that we've developed and others, the indication is that it can observe these things, whether that person is symptomatic or asymptomatic.
And how does the accuracy of these tests compare to, say, PCR tests?
Yeah. So we're going to be we're in a heavily regulated space, right? So this product, we call it Audible Health DX, is our medical device. It's considered software as a medical device. That's FDA's moniker for the kind of technology that we're bringing forward. And ours is SAMD, software as a medical device, AI, and diagnostic. That is our ambition to bring. That's what we seek to bring to market. And the purpose of trying to get through that process in the way that we are today is that we have to go through, of course, all of the steps that FDA makes us go through. And it's an incredibly arduous, precise, as it should be, process to actually bring something like that to market. Because of the stage that we're in, I have to be very precise about what I can and cannot say. So please excuse any vagueness. It is intentional, but I wish I didn't have to do it, because I would love to tell you some stuff that I can't really get to right now. But our hard data is currently embargoed because we are about to pursue our EUA clinical trials for this product. So we are pursuing an application for an emergency use authorization. Things that I can say to you reliably, without going to FDA prison, are that one of the hurdles that FDA has given us is that our results must be what is considered non-inferior to FDA's gold standard, which is dual PCR tests that register about an 80% accuracy rate. So our requirement is to beat or exceed, that number. So 80.1% or above is our requirement. All of our benchtop testing and engineering testing has indicated we have no problem being non-inferior, being considered non-inferior. So that's about as precise as I can give you. But that's the way, that's one of the first hurdles we needed to be able to cross. That is for both sensitivity and specificity, which are, two considerations, not the only considerations, but two that FDA looks at very closely.
Well, let's hope that works, because this would be transformational, I think, for this disease and probably for many others that are similar. Let's switch tack for a moment and talk about the data set. To train this model must have had a massive data set, very robust. Where did the data come from, and how much was actually needed or how large a set was needed to train the ML model?
Some of that we are a little bit private about, but I can say that it is many thousands in terms of our training, data set. There's training, there's tests, and there's validation. So we have to sort of necessarily segregate all of the data samples that we use. Some of the data we did collect ourselves under an approved IRB. As a result, we did obtain that National Science Foundation funding, and so that was just achieving that in the first place was a huge victory for us, because for exactly the reason that you said, Owen, which is that to a lot of people this is science fiction. And, the idea that you could cough into your phone and get a COVID, no COVID result that is not worse than, the current standard, which is a molecular diagnostic, a PCR test. Just that very idea is kind of, there's some people when we talk to them about it, they're like, no, that's just not true. They're like, that's just not possible. And I understand because it does kind of seem like science fiction. But from our point of view, we had many thousands of data assets available to us. Some we collected ourselves, others that are open source. There have been some wonderful work by researchers collecting data out in the world. And so we were able to utilize some of those. We undertook some specialized techniques to enhance the quality, the sort of sound quality of those samples. We have a bunch of provisional patents that we have filed. That's one of them, is our ability to, and the precise way that we enhanced the quality of those sound files. Because as you said, almost everyone does it on their phone. And although phone microphones today are quite good, they're delivering actually quite excellent quality, there's a bunch of other things that phones do to sort of mess with the quality that we need for the kind of work that we do. They have all sorts of tools that sort of cut the top and the bottom of the spike of the sound off. And then people are outside or there's noisy environments. So there's all this background in some of those samples. So we spent a ton of time understanding what those limitations were and building technology to suppress, those things that would get in the way of the AI doing that learning. And when we unlocked the combination of features that we needed to deploy around that, the precision of the accuracy of our predictions went up significantly. So that's been a really big innovation internally for us to getting that right.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought that would impact the accuracy or the efficiency of your analysis. I mean, right now I'm speaking to you through a microphone going through a processor. And normally I've got a really high squeaky voice, but now I've got a radio voice, right, coming through, thanks to this wonderful technology. But all of that actually is something you're saying would actually impede your work, and you've come up with technologies to reduce the impact in the recordings. That's amazing.
Yeah, we kind of have to defeat, the phones are doing it for perfectly good reasons for their purpose. But for us, it was masking some things that we really needed. And so, we spent a bunch of time building technology to defeat, those buffers that would smooth out sound signals that we didn't want to be smooth.
Right. Yeah. For example, like background noise reduction technologies, right, would probably impede your work. Okay. Interesting. I mean, forget about James Bond. This is sounding more and more like Star Trek, to be honest. So we're, this is incredible. Let's talk about something completely different for a moment. Racial bias has been, I think, something that has kind of plagued some implementations of AI in the past, particularly when we're looking at image recognition.
Yeah.
This is obviously different, but have you also struggled in some ways, or has this also been a barrier? And how, if so, how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and that it's a troubling, artifact in many cases of artificial intelligence, particularly as it pertains to law enforcement scenarios or medical scenarios. I mean, there's so much there's so much data about that in the world. In our case, we had the fortunate, position of being able to observe the data that we needed about our samples so that we have a good balance. Unfortunately, COVID is an equal opportunity offender. It affects everybody. And so we didn't have to concern ourselves that there was a data set that was only for, white males or, something like that. We were able to confirm those things for ourselves because, of course, we're always looking for that too. That is the very last thing, especially if you're talking about a diagnostic, trying to achieve a goal like that. It's incredibly important.
And of course, there are all different types of biases, right? Age, gender.
Sure.
And
yes.
Luckily, sounds like you've been able to reduce the impact of any bias entering into the analysis. It's great.
Yeah, it's an ongoing effort. That's a continuous effort that we and I think everyone that's doing this kind of work responsibly is making.
I can imagine, on a completely different topic now, I can imagine that the medical community, that there may be some hesitancy to adopt this, coming from a medical background myself, or a medical family at least. I know that there is a strong preference for face-to-face diagnosis, and to be able to see each patient individually. Have you noticed any hesitancy of that sort?
Sure. And it's a kind of an interesting moment for that, because that you're right that is definitely a common set of preferences that physicians have. They're trained to use all their senses, and they feel like, and patients feel often like, unless the doctor they've seen their doctor in person, a doctor has laid their hands on them in some way, whether it's their ear, their a stethoscope, or look down their throat, or whatever it might be. Even patients feel like they're, until now, have felt like if they aren't getting that kind of interaction, they're not really getting doctor's care. And so that's a very real thing, and it's been around for a very long time. Of course, with COVID, everybody very quickly got comfortable with telemedicine because nobody wanted to create that risk. So in a way, as awful as it is, that was helpful to this idea, because suddenly people had to accept that there was going to need to be some other way for doctors and patients to interact. The thing that we see, and as I said, there are people that just are, they're just skeptics. They're just not going to trust this. And we understand. That's why FDA approval is so very important. That makes a very big difference. But, what we're seeing now, so I think about in my life, my mom died of something called pulmonary fibrosis, which is a horrible lung condition. And she lived with us the last few years of her life, and I used to have to take her to see her pulmonologist every month or two. And she was quite ill, and getting her into the car with the wheelchair and the oxygen, and getting her through, and she was exhausted by the time she came home. It was such an ordeal for her. It was not a problem for me. But when I think about this technology in my fondest ambitions and those of some of the rest of our team, what we could in the future do with a technology like this, if we can get the approval we're looking for, is she could have submitted her cough sample to her pulmonologist every week or every month or whatever interval that doctor asked for. And we could have provided far more granular precision about the nature of that sample. Where is it better or worse? What is stable? What treatments are affecting, her current condition? And you could, in a way that is far more precise than some of the tools that physicians have available to them now, it would make such a difference, and in that moment, I can see a physician feeling both, like this is an improvement, but also, geez, I'd really like to sit and listen to this person myself, So I think the wonderful thing about physicians is they that is what they want. They do want to interact with their patients, and that's what we as patients want too. But I think this kind of technology can bridge things, enhance those things, even if and when we get back to some new normal where everybody feels fine about going to the doctor again. We would hope that this would enhance those interactive those in-person moments, because of the extra data and precision that we could bring to those kinds of interactions.
And the way you describe it makes me think that perhaps this is not reducing that face-to-face contact. Perhaps what it's doing is allowing us to increase the frequency with which there is any kind of contact, and therefore enhancing the times at which there is personal contact. So if there's a monthly visit, there might be weekly updates to that.
Yes, exactly. Right. So more data, more continuously, and perhaps the in-person visit, punctuates, is the result of something that has changed, that a doctor says, oh, you really should come in, or no, it's okay. You don't have to come in this time. We imagine those kinds of improvements as well.
Fantastic. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the FDA process that you've mentioned a few times now. And I think that could be quite interesting for some of our listeners who may also be developing AI technologies just to, in a regulatory industry or a highly regulated industry, looking, and I might get some of these terms wrong, so forgive me, please feel free to correct me, but the implications of developing an AI-diagnostic software as a medical device product, could you talk a little bit more about that, the process that you're going through at the moment, and perhaps the timeline that so that others might be aware of what they might be facing when they go through something similar?
Yes, I will tell you what I know, but I will also caveat this and say that, I did not come into this business with any medical background and certainly no regulatory experience, having run technology companies and, a lot of work in the data business. But this has been an enormously steep learning curve for me and for some of the members of our team. To just give you a quick, the reason why we're able to do this now is because when we first started the business, we were thinking about technology, right? We were like, could we do this? Could this work? We applied to NSF. We were so fortunate to get that award. We got a phase 1 SBIR award. We got our funding in September and immediately hired our data science team and started down that track. And we said, wow, this actually looks like it's working. Like this could be real. And so we right at that time, we had the good fortune of being introduced to the man who is now our chief medical officer and our head of strategy, a guy named Maurice Ramirez, who is an incredible talent. And so Maurice was an ER doc for 25 years. He's boarded in 9 medical specialties. He is a trained virologist. He has been serving disaster medicine. He's known internationally as a disaster medicine specialist, which means he's been doing things like hurricanes and terrorist attacks and pandemics. He trained the whole hospital system in Colorado around H1N1. So he's just got an incredible array of experience. And he's also been interested in precision medicine, AI, and medicine for many years. He's an incredible inventor. And so when he saw what we were doing, he said, I want to help. Let me help, let me participate in some way. And we said, okay, because none of us are MDs, the original group. And it turned out that he's married to a woman who runs an incredible company, that their job is helping medical devices go through the FDA review and approval process. She too looked at the business and said, I want to help. And so she and her incredible team came on. And so we kind of all got together and threw in together. The first thing we did was begin our regulatory strategy planning. At that time, we found that NIH, the National Institutes of Health, had a call out. And so we submitted We spent months putting together our application, and this would be to support our pivotal clinical trials, which we hope that we will be in a position to pursue in the middle of this year. So we applied for a good-sized grant with NIH. We should be hearing about that, we hope, very soon, one way or the other. And then we moved on to looking at the regulatory environment and understanding what was happening, because there's really, for us with FDA, there are two paths. There is the emergency use authorization, because COVID is still, was and still is considered, an emergency health declaration. And so under that guise, there are EUA opportunities available. That's not usually the case. Normally, if you're going to get FDA approval on device, it's a years-long process, very expensive, very time-consuming, as it should be. And so we have the ability to pursue an EUA while at the same time in parallel pursuing our full 510K submission. Will probably be a de novo application, meaning there's no predicate, there's no product like ours in the market that we're comparing ourselves to, but instead we're creating that set of standards. And so we're kind of pursuing that dual path. We're moving as fast as FDA will let us around the emergency use authorization. We will be, completing our EUA clinical trials this quarter and moving as fast as we can after that, as fast as is practicable, while simultaneously pursuing, the full 510K submission, which will take much longer, but, would be great if we could get in that position by the end of the year. What I can tell you is that it is not for the faint of heart. And technologists that try to do this without the expertise of people like this, strategically, it's so important to have that in mind as you design and as you build and as you test, to have that kind of knowledge in place. It would be such a shame, to have somebody like us working on something and find that we made some horrible blunder early on that, we have to rewind and do, so having that early baked into the planning is a huge benefit to, the kind of work we're
I'm sure
trying to
anybody
do.
listening to this will hear that and they will thank you after the fact for that. So that's very great. That's fantastic advice. As unbelievable as this may sound, I also understand that while all of this is going on, you're also working on a completely different product called SoundPass.
Right. So when we decided to make a play and try to get a SAMD approved, we knew that it would take a certain amount of time, and we didn't know how long it would take or how successful our testing and all of the steps that take us toward that would be. And so we decided, well, let's also have a non-medical device. Let's develop a product that can get to market as quickly as possible, that wouldn't be hung up by all the understandable requirements that an FDA approval would have. And so we took some of the same technology and we developed, just as you said, a product called SoundPass. We would describe SoundPass as a biometric safety tool. And its job is a little bit different than what our diagnostic product does. The diagnostic product is supposed to say you have COVID or you don't have COVID, and later to speak to other respiratory conditions. SoundPass is doing something a little bit different. It is looking at whether your current cough signature is the same as what we establish as your baseline. So the idea is, when you first use it, it's also a phone app. When you first use it, you cough into it and you train it over the course of a day. You cough into it about 6 times, and you're teaching it to recognize your unique cough signature. And those 6 coughs together form what we call your baseline. Once your baseline is established, after that, you can then check yourself as much as you want, as many times a day as you want, to see if anything has changed. And the reason why you care is because in the case of SoundPass, what we're looking at is that if you contracted a respiratory virus of some kind, of a cold or the flu or COVID, SoundPass, when you tried to match your current cough to your baseline, SoundPass would say, nope, can't match it. And that is its one job. Its job is to say, I can match it or I can't match it. In our parlance for that product, we call that authenticating. So think of it like a fingerprint or a retina scan or, facial recognition. There's either a match or there's no match. But the way that it is used, its purpose is to help you personally. So you just want to check yourself. You want to say, is anything going on with me? And in particular, we devised that product because we're all very tied into frontline healthcare workers who have now for more than a year been working under conditions that we couldn't possibly imagine asking of these people. And there's a tremendous amount of anxiety, and there's something called COVID guilt that these healthcare workers are so afraid of they're working in a COVID ward and bringing this home to their families before they walk through the door at night. They're terrified, and rightly so, that they might inadvertently be harming the people they love most. So first and foremost, we thought we wanted to give them the peace of mind to check themselves in under 2 minutes and say, I'm the same as I was a week ago or a month ago or this morning. I'm okay. So that was one of our first objectives. But really, SoundPass goes up a step further and helps businesses reopen, because the way that all the pilots that we're running right now with SoundPass are safely going into a facility. So whether that's a church or your place of work or maybe a college campus, or even a retail or restaurant kind of facility, the idea is before you go in your car, because we don't want everyone coughing all over each other, before you go in, you run a self-check, you cough into the app, and it says, yep, you're a match. And when you do that, you get a QR code, and that QR code can be scanned by the premise, the facility that you're walking into, and it says, yes, that was authenticated, and it was within the last 4 hours. And that piece is really important, because we know that if the reasons that you wouldn't be able to match your current cough to your baseline are because you've got some kind of respiratory virus, or maybe you inhaled some horrible chemicals, which I hope you did not do. But those are the kinds of reasons why SoundPass would react and say, we can't make a match. And we also know that if you are exposed to something like that, to the flu, or God forbid you got COVID, that change would start to be visible in a 4 to 8 hour period after something like that occurred. So that's why when we use SoundPass, we want people to, if they're going to use it for walking into a building and interacting with other people, they should really do it every 4 hours. So when we generate a QR code, the QR code is only valid for 4 hours, and then it expires. And if you want to use it for entry, you create another sample. You cough again, and it gives you a new, fresh authentication. And that's just to make sure we're doing this as smartly as possible. We know that it is not a diagnostic. It does not diagnose COVID. That is not its job. But it does pick up important changes that could predict risk. And it is dramatically more scientific and rigorous than taking someone's temperature, which I know there's a lot of that going on, but it really doesn't help that much. So, so it's a much improved kind of entry point, checkpoint safety process.
Well, I also see the huge benefit here in that for someone, we've seen a lot of resistance to basic public health measures all around the world in terms of wearing masks and social distancing. Yeah. This could be something, though, with a much lower barrier to adoption that might encourage many more people to adhere to some basic public health measures while still being able to avoid the perhaps the negative consequences or the negative side of wearing masks.
Yes, we would certainly hope so. That businesses are in such a difficult position. Of course, they want to reopen. Of course, they want to get customers back, and their businesses have been so crippled. by all of this. And so anything we can do to help them reassure themselves, their employees, and their customers that everyone walking through the door has had a very recent, pretty rigorous check, that's just good for everybody. We are working here in Colorado with the 5-star certification program, which is helping, with the state to reopen. We're excited about the ability to incorporate our capabilities as one of the features of the 5-star program, which is excellent, by the way. But yeah, we would hope that this idea, our vision for SoundPass is it costs $25 per person per year. So you pay $25 one time, and after that you can check yourself 20 times a day if that's what you want to do. And you can have both this peace of mind and, I hope, feel better about going to places you want or need to go, whether it's work or play or worship, however you want to get back to. That's what we're trying to make a bit smarter.
What about privacy issues or data, in particular data privacy, personal data privacy? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. That's a topic near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time in the data business, and while I wouldn't call myself a privacy expert, I would say I am very much a privacy advocate. It's been very important to me in every business I've ever run, and some of the businesses I've run have been explicitly data businesses. So with respect to this kind of thing with SoundPass, so this is truly a private check. There's nothing getting reported to anybody about anything in terms of whether you can or cannot authenticate. You choose what you do with that. We, as a matter of basic policy, we don't share, trade, exchange, sell anyone's data ever. Like, we would never sell your name or, anything like that. So particularly with SoundPass, that's meant to be personal. You decide if you want to share your QR code with someone, but that's as far as it goes. There's no registry, it's not like that. In the case of our medical device, that's different. That's a public health issue. And we absolutely report when, if and when we can bring that product to market. We would, of course, as is required by law, we would be reporting those results. But with SoundPass, very different scenario. And as I said, as much a self-check as anything else. But, critical to all of this is data security. Your data isn't private if it isn't secure. Even if no one's actively sharing it, if it gets hacked, then that's not good. So we're proud to be part of Microsoft's startup program, which has been incredibly helpful to us in 100 different ways. And of course, so the way our products work is the app is kind of, our apps are kind of dumb. They don't really do anything. They're a view screen for what's really going on in the cloud. So all of our processing and production is taking place in Microsoft Azure. And so that's where all of our logic and our compute power, exists. And so, of course, Azure has incredible safety and redundancy and, security protocols. And so we're very fortunate to be able to rely on all of those, as it would be if it was, AWS or, certainly they're not the only ones.
And when can we expect perhaps to all benefit from this great technology? Are there some indications that we might be able to head back to huge concerts and we can all go to music clubs again?
I sure hope so. I think there will be a new normal. I do. Speaking only for myself, I'm now fully vaccinated. I'm still a little anxious, frankly, about roaming around, and I won't take my mask off. Maybe I've just spent too much time in this business. I don't know, but I do think there will be a new normal that we will all have to adjust to. One of the things we're trying to do with in the case of COVID is, in certain outbreaks, there's this idea of ring vaccinations. You find an outbreak, and you vaccinate all around that outbreak in a series of rings to try to contain it as much as possible. And that is our hope, is to work with CDC and all the vaccination processes, so that if we could get people using our diagnostic product, presuming that we can bring it to market, if we could get them using that product, first of all, there are no samples, there are no swabs. As you said, there is no lab processing, there's no chemicals, there's no specialized personnel putting the things up your nose. So the scalability is what's so exciting. Certainly accuracy and precision is critical, but once you cover that hurdle, the rest becomes, can you make testing a daily occurrence? And really, that's where we need to be. Everybody really should test every day, but that's just not possible right now. There's just no way to do that for a million different reasons. So we could be in a position of being able to support everyone testing every day. That would help this idea. We're getting to the point now where we are going to have to do this, ring vaccination strategy, where there's outbreaks and everybody in that area, we can see that there's outbreaks. Those people, we make sure to focus vaccination efforts there. That will make a difference. But there are many unknowns yet with this virus and how efficiently, how effectively we will get everyone to become vaccinated. There's so many questions ahead.
Did I hear this correctly, or understand this correctly, that SoundPass is going to help me get to a concert this summer?
Well, we are talking with a series of rock bands. I couldn't name any in particular, but definitely one of the objectives we really want to try to bring forward is to bring some sense of normalcy like that back. I bet that's what you were asking me a minute ago, and I went off on the wrong tangent. And we are in talks with some folks that, what's happening with some of these venues, whether it's like a business, a trade show, or a conference, or a concert, a performance of some kind, indoor or outdoor, is they're understandably implementing a series of protocols like, having people walk through a vitals check. So checking your temperature, checking your pulse ox, things like that. And they're telling people to arrive 4, 5, or 6 hours early because it takes a long time to do that for 2 or 5 or 20,000 people. So one of the strategies we're working on right now with some of our partners is creating kind of a fast lane. So if you have SoundPass, all you have to do is scan your QR code and get in really quickly. So that's something we hope, just from an efficiency point of view, will make some of those in-person, especially big group gatherings, a whole lot more attractive and a lot smarter in terms of getting in. And so that's definitely something we're working on. Interestingly, we're doing the same thing with a couple of mega churches, that are trying to get folks back in to worship together, which has been so hard for so many people. And again, create a fast lane so that people can get in, into worship at the right time when they want to be there, instead of waiting around for hours or having to go at all off times. We're also working on a pilot with a fraternity at a school here in Colorado. You can imagine fraternities. You can imagine how hard it is to keep college students. They keep getting locked down and they keep getting quarantined and they get exposed. So what we'll be publicizing here soon is that they're using it every day. They're all testing, using SoundPass every day. And anyone who can authenticate, that's who they send to get tested. And so that's this way of avoiding having to test everyone all the time, but definitely focusing testing on people where there is some likelihood of risk that they can address both more time efficiently and more cost effectively, we would hope. And as horrifying as COVID is, long COVID is really terrifying. So there's a bunch of research out right now. CDC and others have produced some research that says that somewhere between 25 and 30% of people who get COVID, whether they knew they had COVID or not, develop long COVID, meaning that they have symptoms for more than 100 days after they've been become viral negative. So you get a PCR test, you're positive for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever the period is when you're testing viral positive. Suddenly you're negative, but the symptoms never go away. And the symptoms are incredibly debilitating. The degree of impact on these people's lives is awful. There not only are there physical symptoms, but there's mental health challenges. There's enormous financial impacts for these people. They can't go back to work. I mean, it's a horrible constellation of problems and symptoms. And we realized that SoundPass, our modest little product SoundPass, can actually be an important tool, an important signal for these people. What happens right now is long COVID is a diagnosis of opinion by physicians because there's no diagnostic test that says you have long COVID. You can tell whether you had the original infection, but not long COVID. And so you look at all of these combinations of characteristics, and it's really challenging for people that suffer from this because they'll have a variety of symptoms. They'll have cardiac or neurological or pulmonary. They'll have tingling in their fingers or rashes or fatigue or brain fogginess. And they're already exhausted, and then they're trying to keep track of all this stuff. And now they're seeing 5 specialists, and it's horrible for them. So we realized that we could adapt SoundPass and have it capture their personal baselines. Let's say 3 days in a row. Typically, they feel better in the mornings than they do in the afternoon or evening. Capture their baseline and then allow them to submit samples regularly throughout the day as much as they want. And they'll be able to see how far off their baseline, their personal best, how far off they are at different points in the day. And of course, keep track of all that data. And we're also including a symptom diary, a digital symptom diary that lets them log all of those symptoms very, very quickly and easily. And we think that by combining those two things, that data about how far off their baseline they are, and all of the symptoms that they have, even if it's only for their own knowledge, it would be a huge help to them. But of course, if they want to share it with their physicians, that would be enormously helpful as well. And this matters in particular to long COVID because I told you earlier about how the human body is this resonance chamber. And what SoundPass is really looking at, there are 16 nerves that SoundPass is listening to when it picks up a sample. There's 12 cranial nerves and the top 4 cervical nerves. And it turns out that SoundPass is really good at listening to those 16, which are the same 16 that COVID affects. And so we are able to we can't necessarily or yet tell you which of those 16 nerves is being affected, but we can tell you that at least one of them there is some form of dysfunction. And that in and of itself is really useful data. And we work with some folks that manage or lead a series of long COVID patient support groups all over the world. And this is something we've formed a long COVID medical advisory board. So those physicians are consulting to us. We're forming a large patient panel. We know that this technology can help. And so we're in the midst of developing something that will be, we hope, a great tool for them, again, an app, but that will actually put some precision and data around what they're experiencing, in the hopes that even if it's just for them, it can help them through this journey, which, just yesterday I saw a piece that said that the estimate is that by the time the pandemic is over, maybe a year or a year and a half or 2 years from now, somewhere between 4 and 9% of the entire population globally will have long COVID. That is a staggering number. And governments and businesses all over the world are waking up to what this means. It is a significant crisis. It is at least as challenging as just the original pandemic, because we don't know how long this will last. We don't know how long these symptoms will persist. We don't know a lot of things. And it's something we know we can help. So that's been our very latest foray.
So outside of the use cases that we've talked to today, where is the future headed with this technology? Is there a potential maybe to leverage it in terms of diagnosing other respiratory diseases, public health issues like air quality and pollution and wildfires is having on our respiratory health? Where is the future? Where is the future headed for this?
We would certainly hope so. We know that our technology is sensitive enough to pick up and address and quantify things like that. A big push in medicine today is establishing and monitoring the social determinants of health, right? And so that's environmental factors, both in your home and outdoors when you're out working and walking through the world. There are some significant considerations there. So we know that we can support at the very least precise data collection to help physicians and researchers understand what those impacts that affect your respiratory system, what those impacts are, how soon they're felt, for how long they are experienced, perhaps tie it to longer term prognosis. So we definitely see those kinds of things as we continue to grapple with climate change, and as you talked about with fires and some of the deforesting of places like the Amazon. Those things become incredibly important, and all of us are experienced that, we just might not know it. And so we definitely intend to be able to unleash this kind of technology. We're not there yet, but to unleash this kind of technology on those kinds of problems, because they're bigger and the technology exists. It's a matter of us training it to do the right thing, and others. I know there will be many others that will join us in this work. But we do see that. We see a lot of scenarios, even for people that are smokers. That's a really, really difficult. It's a tough habit to kick, and it's incredibly injurious. And so being able to help people see what's happening to them as they're smoking, help their physicians. We see all of those scenarios in our future, for
and how
sure.
About the future of AI in general? Where do you see AI taking us when you perhaps look at just even AI in relation to health and medicine over the next 5 to 10 years? How big of an impact is it going to have?
It will have a significant effect. And one of the first things I think we will all experience, one of the first benefits, will be just as we talked about when we first started talking, which is letting the compute power do that first layer, that front line of work to rule out problems, right? To start with saying, well, what I can tell you is it isn't this. And that in and of itself is very valuable. And to narrow a potential a diagnosis or treatment regimen, and then allow physicians to be, truly great physicians are artists in their own way. They're incredibly creative. They're intuitive. They've amassed an enormous amount of knowledge, and then they're able to deploy it person by person by person. So giving them the ability to do only that, and not all the blocking and tackling and the administrative and the typing in of things, right? If we could somehow free physicians to use that brilliance maximally so that they're not diluting that on things that don't bring us great health outcomes, but are necessary to our process. If we could use AI just to do that, that would be a gigantic step forward in medicine.
Fantastic, Kitty. Well, we've heard all, in a fascinating talk, we've heard about so many different new things. And what strikes me is that, we've all heard for decades, we have to start listening to our bodies. Well, you're basically giving us the technology to do that in a super advanced and new way. So you're almost the embodiment of that phrase. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for all of these great technology that you're bringing to market and putting together this amazing team and bringing great products to the world. So thanks indeed for all of this. And we can't wait to see where this is all going to be in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me and for spending all the time with me. Appreciate it.
Don't forget to check out harborresearch.com for more insights on smart systems. This podcast was edited and produced by Christy Zoke and moderated by Owen Jennings.
Harbor Research is a growth strategy consulting and venture development firm with over 30 years of experience working with leading manufacturers, service providers, and technology developers to discover, design, and develop smart systems and Internet of Things growth opportunities. Visit harborresearch.com to learn more or follow us wherever you get your podcasts.